I was the last caretaker of the church that was buried alive, part 1. No one told me that the bells still rang from underground, or that the stone angels would cry blood when the sun sets. Chapter 1. Arrival at the village. I arrived under a sky the color of rotting parchment, the clouds hanging low like damp wool, threatening to suffocate the crooked village below. Even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through this place, and what little of it remained carried the scent of burnt wax and wet stone. The sign at the entrance had long since rotted away, its wood softened by moss and time. I only knew I was in the right place because the letter had said, "The path ends where the world forgets." And it did. There were perhaps 8 or 9 houses, each with shutters drawn tight as coffins. Their chimneys stood like blackened fingers, silent and unused. No laughter, no barking dogs. Just the echo of my boots on the gravel and a hush that clung to the eaves like cobwebs. A man glanced at me from behind a curtain. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched, as if trying to remember if he'd seen me in a dream or a warning. At the heart of the village was a single stone well, boarded over with rusted nails. There were symbols carved into the planks. Not letters. Words. Crude and desperate. Beyond the well, the path turned sharply, climbing a ridge where the trees gave way to a gentle, unnatural mound, a rise in the earth too symmetrical, too deliberate. My cottage stood just at its edge. It was older than it looked, sagging slightly to one side, its roof half consumed by ivy. A weathered crucifix hung askew above the door. The nails holding it in place were bent, as if something had tried to tear it down and failed. Inside, the air was dry and still, like the breath had been taken from the rooms and never returned. Dust coated every surface like frost. A lantern waited on the table, next to a tarnished brass key with a tag. Bell tower. Sunset only. Beside it, an envelope. Thick parchment, sealed with red wax. The wax was brittle, cracked at the edges, as if it had been waiting decades to be opened. My name was written in a hand that knew how to use ink sparingly and with reverence. To the final caretaker. Chapter 2. The caretaker's cottage. The cottage had 2 rooms. One for sleeping, one for waiting. The bedroom was cold, despite the hearth. No matter how many logs I burned, the chill never lifted from the stones. The walls were lined with narrow shelves filled with yellowed books, some blank, others written in spidery Latin or an archaic script that made my teeth ache when I tried to read it. I slept poorly that first night. The wind scratched against the shutters like a creature trying to claw its way in, and once, just once, I thought I heard the distant clang of a bell. But there was no tower in sight. The next morning, I explored the second room. It had once been a study, perhaps, or something like a chapel. A small writing desk stood beneath a boarded window. Stacks of brittle papers, ledgers, and wax-sealed bundles crowded every surface. On the far wall hung a rusted bell key, long and iron, shaped like a cross. I took it down. The weight of it surprised me. There was also a cabinet, locked with a mechanism that had no keyhole, only a shallow indent in the shape of an open palm. I didn't touch it. Instead, I turned my attention to the fireplace. Someone, at some point, had bricked it shut. But the bricks were uneven, looser than they should have been. I chipped at the mortar with the edge of a poker and removed a small stack, revealing a cavity behind. Inside were 2 objects. A book, bound in cracked leather, with no title, and a lantern made of black glass, heavy and cold, filled with oil that shimmered like ink. The book opened with a sound like dry skin tearing. On the first page, written in a formal hand, "Instructions for the care of the buried church." I didn't read further. Not yet. I placed the book gently on the desk and turned to the only window in the room, a narrow slit through which I could just make out the mound beyond the trees. Not a hill. Not a natural rise. I could feel that now in my bones. It was a tomb. A weight. And somehow, watching me. Chapter 3. The sinking hill. The mound drew me. Not suddenly. Not with urgency. But with something subtler, a gentle tug, like a half-forgotten song that returns uninvited to the mind and hums just beneath your thoughts. Always there. Always waiting. That morning, after a breakfast I barely tasted, I stepped beyond the crooked door of the cottage and followed the overgrown path through the frost-bitten grass toward the rise. No birds sang. The trees that lined the trail were warped and hunched, leaning away from the mound as though recoiling from its presence. Their bark was pale, flaked, and split like dry parchment. One tree had grown in a spiral, as if twisting to escape something buried beneath its roots. When I reached the foot of the hill, I stopped. There was no mistaking it now. The mound was man-made. The incline was too perfect, the slope too deliberate. And there were markers. Dozens of them, half submerged in the earth, all weather-worn and blank. Grave markers, I realized, but their inscriptions had been scraped off, gouged away by some sharp tool or claw. It wasn't time that had erased the names. It was intention. And they weren't arranged like a normal cemetery. They circled the mound, not around it, but facing it, as if watching, guarding, or praying. I ran my fingers across one of the stones. It was cold, deeply cold, though the sun sat directly above. My breath fogged. The ground beneath my boots felt soft, spongy, but not like normal earth. It gave slightly, as though something hollow lay just beneath the surface. At the peak of the mound stood a great iron cross, crooked and rusted, its base sunken deep into the earth. Vines choked it like ropes. Around it, for stone angels, small, eroded, and crude. Their wings were broken. Their faces disfigured by time, or maybe by hands that couldn't bear what they saw. All four angels faced outward, backs to the cross, as though turned in shame or defiance. I found myself standing between them, breathing heavy, sweat cold on my back. There was a sound, faint, nearly imperceptible, just beneath the wind. Not the bell this time. Breathing. Slow. Massive. As though the earth itself inhaled. I stepped back and nearly tripped over a slab of stone mostly buried in dirt. With some effort, I cleared it. It was larger than the others, almost a door. No inscription. Only a deep vertical groove down the center and an old iron ring to one side. A seal of some kind. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I stood in that unnatural clearing, with the dead circling around and the angels refusing to meet my gaze, and I asked aloud, "Were you meant to hold back?" No answer came. But a sudden gust of wind pushed hard against my back, driving me forward as if the hill itself wished to swallow me. I fled. Not out of panic, not yet, but something deeper. A sense of trespass. Like I had knocked at a door not meant for knocking, and something on the other side had stirred. Back at the cottage, I found the black glass lantern still resting on the desk. I lit it. The flame burned violet, colorless at its edge. I opened the instruction book. The pages whispered as they turned. There, written in dry ink. Ring once at dusk. Never twice. Remain indoors at the bleeding hour. Speak not the church's name. It is neither holy nor forgotten. I wrote the words down in my own hand, not to remember them, but because I feared what would happen if I forgot. That night, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and listened. Somewhere beyond the trees, at the edge of the sinking hill. The earth exhaled. Chapter 4, First Sunset. It began with the light. Not the darkness, that came later, but the light that comes just before it. A thin, sickle-shaped light. The kind of light that makes you feel like the sun isn't setting, but retreating. The sky over the village took on a pale yellow tinge, like parchment soaked in tea. The kind of dying gold that touches everything, makes windows look like eyes, and people like shadows wearing skin. That was when I noticed it, the stillness. The quiet. No crows. No wind. No movement from the distant trees. Even the insects were silent, as if the entire valley had agreed, wordlessly, that it was time to hold its breath. I sat in the caretaker's cottage, the black glass lantern lit and guttering softly in the corner. The flame flickered in a way that didn't follow the drafts. It pulsed instead, like something listening. Or breathing. I could feel the heat of it against the back of my neck even when I turned away. I stood up, lantern in hand, and stepped to the small window that faced the hill. The mound was there, as always, unmoved, but the color of the grass had changed. It looked gray. Not in shadow, but drained. The iron cross at the top had caught the last rays of the sun. It glowed a dull, rusty red, like a blade recently pulled from the fire. And then, I heard it. Bells. Faint. Slow. Hollow. Not like church bells in the traditional sense. No joyful clamor. No ringing call to worship. This was a damp sound, muffled by dirt and time, rising up from the soil like a memory trying to surface. One single toll. Then silence. But it echoed inside my chest. Not in my ears. I felt it in my ribs, like something pulling taut, a string beneath the skin. I didn't know if I had done it, somehow, if the bell had responded to my presence, my watching, or perhaps to the fact that I had opened the book, broken the seal, spoken the forbidden aloud. I backed away from the window, but I couldn't stop watching. And that was when I saw them. The stone angels. There were 4 of them, surrounding the iron cross atop the mound. I'd studied them earlier that day, weathered, disfigured, backs turned to the hill. But now, they had changed. I wiped the glass with my sleeve, squinting through the grime. The angels' faces were streaked, not with rain, but with something thicker. Crimson. Viscous. Blood. Leaking from the corners of their eyes in long, dry rivulets. It wasn't fresh, not exactly. More like old blood reanimated. It clung to them, unwilling to fall, refusing gravity. One angel's hand had shifted, no longer at its side, but raised as if reaching out, or beckoning. I stepped back from the window and drew the curtain. My hands were shaking. I turned to the black glass lantern. The flame had grown. It was silent, but more intense, taller now, licking the top of the chimney with bluish light. The oil inside swirled like ink disturbed by breath. Something scratched at the cottage door. Not a knock. Not an animal. A dragging sound, like nails against wood, tracing the grain from top to bottom. A single pass. Then gone. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The bell had tolled once. That was the rule. Never twice. I sat down, opened the book again, and forced myself to read the next page. The ink here was darker, not black, but a shade of red that looked disturbingly like what I'd seen on the angel's cheeks. Should the bell ring at dusk, you are to remain within. Do not reply. Do not approach the hill. The angels will cry only once per season. Their tears are not mourning. They are a sign. If you witness this sign, you have been seen in return. I didn't sleep that night. Not truly. The air in the cottage had turned stale and heavy. The firewood burned too fast and gave off no scent. The pages of the instruction book refused to stay closed, rustling every hour like whispering mouths. And just before midnight, I heard it again, not bells this time, but the distant creak of stone moving over stone, as though something beneath the hill had shifted its weight. Chapter 5. The Sealed Instructions. At dawn, I unlatched the window, and the air that drifted in was colder than it should have been, sharp, metallic, tinged with the scent of iron and damp leaves. The sun barely pierced the gray morning haze, but it was enough to see that the angels atop the hill had returned to their original positions. Their eyes were dry, their hands folded, but the blood streaks were still there, dried, not gone. Proof I hadn't imagined the night before. Proof that something had happened, and that it had seen me. I spent the morning pacing, not out of fear, not yet, but because I didn't know what to do with myself. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my boots made me flinch. The black glass lantern had gone out sometime in the night, but the wick was unburned, as if the flame had never been real at all. Eventually, I sat again at the writing desk. The instruction book lay where I'd left it, open to that last sentence. If you witness this sign, you have been seen in return. The next page was sealed. Not just stuck together, but sewn at the edge, a tight, careful stitch binding 3 pages shut, using black thread so fine it looked like strands of hair. There was no indication of how to open it, but the poker from the fireplace was still beside the hearth. I heated the tip in the embers and pressed it gently to the thread. It smoked, curled, and hissed as it gave way. The smell it released was wrong, like burned cloth soaked in embalming fluid. The pages peeled apart like old wounds. The paper beneath was softer, more like skin than parchment. And there, in a different hand than the rest of the book, written in trembling ink and uneven lines, was the truth that no one in the village would speak aloud. This is not a church. It was once a mouth made of stone and sanctified by the unspoken bishop. The next line was scratched so hard into the paper that the page tore slightly. We built it. We fed it. Until it fed on us. There were drawings next, crude diagrams of the hill's interior. Stairs that spiraled down into nothingness. A bell tower turned upside down, buried beneath the ground like an inverted tooth. One page showed a human figure standing at an altar, arms raised, surrounded by shadows that were not people but impressions, silhouettes of the faithful long since dissolved into dust. Above the altar, etched in jagged lines, hovered a symbol that defied focus, a circle with 7 broken lines piercing it like thorns. And beneath it, written in ink that looked somehow wet. The bell is not rung to call the faithful. It is rung to warn the earth. I leaned back, skin clammy, the air in the cottage pressing in like wet cloth. The light from the window had dimmed, though the sun had not yet set. I glanced outside. The villagers were nowhere to be seen. Not one curtain twitched. Not a single footstep echoed. It was as if I were entirely alone. And then, as I turned back toward the open book, I saw something I'd missed before. At the bottom of the stitched page, faint, almost hidden in the fibers of the parchment, was my name, written not in ink, but in something darker, something that had been absorbed into the page long ago. I ran my finger across the letters. The skin on my fingertip tingled, not from heat or texture, but recognition. I didn't remember signing anything. I had never seen this book before. And yet, a part of me had. Somewhere in my blood, or in the memory passed down through the generations of caretakers who had come before me, I had already agreed. The final line on the page confirmed it. You have accepted the role. You may not resign. You may only endure. I closed the book gently, but the pages did not rest. They twitched as if something inside them still moved, slowly, like larvae beneath tree bark. That night, I placed the bell key on the table beside my bed. And as I lay there in the dim light of the black lantern's afterglow, I understood what was coming. I had not been called here. I had been remembered. Chapter 6. A Visit from the Widow Ashcroft. I didn't hear her arrive. The knock was soft, not hesitant, but almost polite. The kind of knock you might use when tapping on a coffin lid to ask if anyone's still inside. I paused, hand hovering over the book I'd spent the last hour rereading, as if hoping its words would rearrange themselves into something less damning. But no, the lines stayed as they were. Heavy. Absolute. A second knock. Still soft. Still patient. I opened the door. She stood no taller than my shoulder, wrapped in 3 layers of shawls and a faded black coat that might have once been part of some widow's uniform, or perhaps a nun's, or something older. A veil covered her face, not out of modesty but habit. Her hands were gloved, though the fingers looked withered beneath the fabric, like twigs wrapped in lace. She didn't introduce herself. She simply stepped inside, slow and sure, as if she had every right to cross that threshold. As if she'd done it before. Only once she stood fully in the glow of the black glass lantern did she speak. Her voice was thin, sharp-edged, the sound of dried leaves being stirred by wind. You lit it, she said. Not a question. I nodded. She turned her veiled face toward the lantern, then toward the desk, where the book sat, its pages twitching ever so slightly in the firelight. Then it has started again. I waited for her to explain. She didn't. Instead, she placed a small bundle of wax-wrapped cloth on the table. I unrolled it carefully, half expecting bones or dried flesh, but it held candles, pale and hand-dipped. Their wicks were soaked in something dark, not quite wax, not quite oil. Burn one each night, she said. In the window. Facing the hill. It won't stop anything, but it might confuse it. A little. I swallowed. What is it? She turned toward me. Beneath the veil, I caught the barest suggestion of her eyes, clouded, gray as ash, the whites yellowed like old teeth. It doesn't have a name. Not anymore. Names give shape, and it must not have shape. We buried it to prevent that. She looked past me toward the fireplace, or perhaps through it. But you read the book. I said nothing. You heard the bell. Still nothing. You felt the hill breathe. I nodded, finally. That seemed to satisfy her. Not comfort her. Nothing about this woman spoke of comfort, but confirmed something she already knew. It's waking, she said. Her words felt like old dust shaken from rafters. Not a threat. Not even a prophecy. A fact. What is it waiting for? I asked. She turned her back to me, reached into her shawl, and withdrew a small object, a wooden token, etched with symbols that seemed to move subtly as the fire flickered. She placed it on the desk beside the book. Not waiting, she whispered. Remembering. I felt my skin crawl. Remembering what? She paused at the door. Not what? Who? She opened the door, paused again as if considering something, then finally added. You're not the first to stand in this place. But you might be the last. And with that, she stepped into the night. No lantern. No cane. She walked as if guided by some sense older than sight. I watched her disappear down the path toward the sleeping village, her outline swallowed by fog and shadow. I looked back at the token. It was warm to the touch. On the underside, someone had carved a single word. Ashcroft. Chapter 7. The Forgotten Sermon. The token stayed on my desk all night. I didn't dare move it. It gave off no heat anymore, but something about it radiated the sense of a presence, not watching, not waiting, just lingering. Like incense after a burial. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed in voices. Not images. Just whispers, layered like choir harmonies, but wrong somehow. Too many mouths. No pauses for breath. Just verse after verse, speaking words I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The stone remembers what flesh forgets. Where bone once knelt, memory bleeds upward. Feed the root. Bleed the bell. I woke before dawn, sweat-soaked, mouth dry. The room was cold, the fire long dead, but my lips still moved, whispering the last lines of the dream aloud before I could stop myself. And I understood them, or thought I did. Not logically, not with meaning, but like how one understands the shape of grief or the sound of a closed door where one used to be open. I dressed quickly and turned to the fireplace, still cold, the bricks dark with soot. I don't know what drew my eye to the mantel. I'd stared at it a dozen times. But this morning, I noticed something new. A fine crack in the stone above the hearth, straight and narrow, like a sealed mouth. I pried at it with the poker. The stone shifted. A tiny fragment fell away and revealed a hollow behind it, just wide enough to hold a sheaf of paper wrapped in oilskin. I pulled it free and unwrapped it carefully. What I held was brittle, edges curled and spotted with age. But the ink had survived, faint but legible. The top was headed with 2 words in a dead dialect I did not recognize, and yet I knew what they meant. The 13th homily. I read. Not aloud. Not at first. Even silently, it moved strangely. The grammar was wrong. The rhythm unnatural. The sermon didn't flow, it spiraled. The first part was familiar, almost orthodox. We gather, not to ascend, but to descend into knowing. The soul does not rise. It folds inward, layer by layer, until it finds the echo. But then the language changed. Became fevered. Ecstatic. Let the bell crack the skull of silence. Let the mouth of God open beneath our feet. We are not his children, we are his teeth. I stopped reading. Something was dripping, a slow, rhythmic patter. I looked up. The black glass lantern had begun to weep. Tiny beads of dark oil slid down the glass, as though the flame inside were producing more than it burned. It hissed faintly with each drop, and the smell it released, rosemary and rust, turned my stomach. Then something impossible happened. The fireplace flared to life. No spark. No ember. Just ignition. A single tongue of flame rose from the ash. And from within it, not a voice exactly, but a shape made of sound, whispered through the crackling wood. Speak it. I backed away. But the book, the 13th homily, fluttered open in my hands, as if it knew where I had stopped. The flame hissed again, louder this time. Speak it. So I did. My voice came haltingly at first, then smoother, as if guided. The words slid over my tongue like warm water, unnatural, foreign, but not resisted. Like they'd been waiting inside me all along. The room darkened around the edges. My breath grew cold. And the shadows on the walls deepened, not with shape, but with weight, as if the room had grown closer to something else. I spoke the final line of the homily, though I didn't remember doing it. The fire went out instantly. Silence. Complete and total. No wind. No sound from outside. Even the boards beneath my feet felt still, as if holding their breath. Then the bell tolled. Once. Not from the hill. From beneath the floorboards. I dropped the homily. It didn't fall, it simply vanished from my hands. As if it had never been. And the fireplace, once cold, now pulsed with slow, dull heat, not from flame, but from memory. I backed away, heart pounding, until I stood beneath the iron bell key hanging on its peg near the door. I knew what the widow had meant now. The bell was not a call to gather. It was a warning. Something had heard me speak. Chapter 8. The Hollow Door. It was nearly evening when I found the door. The sun hovered low, blurred by cloud and smoke, casting a reddish stain across the edge of the sky. I had not left the cottage all day, not truly, only paced from room to room like a moth circling the edge of flame. But something in the air had shifted. The ground no longer merely felt wrong, it sounded wrong. When I walked across the wooden floorboards, I began to hear it, an echo that didn't belong. Footsteps should thud or creak. These made no sound at all, except that the silence responded. A strange, almost musical resonance beneath each step, as though I were walking across a drumskin stretched over a deep, hollow place. I paused by the hearth, listening. Then I lifted the rug. It was simple and woolen, woven in a geometric pattern I hadn't noticed before, or perhaps hadn't been meant to see. Shapes that weren't symbols exactly, but approximations too soft around the edges, too worn to decipher. Beneath it, stone. Pale, smooth, and circular. In the center, a ring of rusted iron embedded in the floor. A hatch. The metal was cold, colder than the rest of the room. Not chill, absolute. I touched it and felt my breath frost in the air. Something below was not simply buried. It was preserved. I took the iron bell key from the wall. It was heavier than I remembered. As I moved it near the ring, the hatch emitted a dull click. Not like a lock opening, more like something exhaling after a long sleep. I pulled. The stone circle lifted with surprising ease, revealing a short stairwell descending into blackness. The steps were narrow and slick with moisture, cut from the same pale stone. They curved slightly to the left, as if afraid to go straight down. I lit the black glass lantern. Its violet-blue flame flared to life without a match, responding to the darkness like a predator catching scent. I held it in front of me as I descended. The temperature dropped with each step. Not gradually, but in bursts. The air was thick with the smell of damp salt, mildew, and something older, something like formaldehyde and old bone. 10 steps. 15. Then the passage opened into a hollow space. I stepped into a chamber maybe 10 feet wide. The walls curved like the inside of a ribcage, carved, not built. This place had been made by human hands, but long ago, and not in reverence. There were no pews, no altar, no icons, only silence, and the sense of being beneath something sacred and wrong. At the far wall stood a stone door, flat, rectangular, featureless save for a single circular indentation at its center, about the size of the token the widow Ashcroft had left me. I withdrew it from my pocket. It had grown warmer since I'd last touched it, as if it wanted to be used. I pressed it into the recess. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door began to hum. No, not the door. The walls. The earth. A deep vibration, not sound exactly, but feeling the bones of the chamber singing, so low it made my teeth hurt. And from beyond the door, something responded. A pulse. One single throb of sound, like a heartbeat carved from stone. I stepped back. Dust fell from the ceiling in slow, deliberate spirals. The floor beneath my boots shifted imperceptibly, like the hill above was adjusting its weight, rolling over in its sleep. But I had not opened the door. I had only introduced myself. There was writing now, appearing slowly around the frame in curling script, as though ink were being pushed from within the stone. The flesh speaks. The stone listens. The key remembers. I turned and fled the chamber, up the stairs 2 at a time. The lantern sputtered and went out as I reached the hatch, but the light was no longer needed. The evening sky above was on fire with that same unnatural hue I'd seen on the first sunset. Only now, I understood it wasn't a color of day. It was the reflection of something stirring below. I slammed the hatch shut and dragged the desk across it. Not to keep anything out. I wasn't foolish enough to think I could. It was to keep myself in. Because I was beginning to understand something terrible. The door wasn't waiting to be opened. It was waiting for me to be ready. Chapter 9. The Dream of the Choir. I don't remember falling asleep. There was no clear boundary, no slipping into warmth, no slowing breath, no moment of surrender. I was at the desk, rereading the carved words around the hidden door's frame for the 10th time. Then I blinked, and the world was gone. No cottage, no hearth, no desk or lantern. Only darkness, vast, living darkness, like the inside of a hollow lung. A void that breathed. The first thing I felt was the sound. Not heard, felt. A low hum, just beneath human hearing. Like the murmuring of many voices behind a wall of thick earth. Then came the rhythm. Footsteps. Many. In unison. Soft, barefooted, but impossibly synchronized, as though not walking, but gliding. I saw them slowly, as shapes gathered from shadow. A choir. Dozens of figures, tall and robed, yet impossibly thin. Their garments were stitched together from strips of parchment, some stained with red, others covered in writing. The ink bled even in the dark. They had no eyes. Their mouths were sewn shut with black thread, not all of them neatly. Some had threads piercing through lips and cheeks, wrapped across the jaw like ritual bindings. Others had simply torn their mouths open again, revealing teeth like broken piano keys. And yet, they sang. Through closed mouths and stitched flesh, the sound rose, not in harmony, but in layers. Discordant. Wrong. Every note slightly off from the next, creating a trembling, crawling noise that wasn't music, but the shape of something trying to remember music. They sang backwards. Not just the words, the melody itself seemed reversed, as if played from the end toward the beginning. Every syllable rolled up into the throat, swallowed instead of spoken. And still, I understood it. They were singing about me. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean, as their voices rose, my name slipped into the folds of their hymn. Not just once. Again and again. Et member Milius, memor est, caretaker. Last of the vow, hallowed not holy. And he shall be the hymn remembered by the hill. They began to move. Not toward me, but around me, circling, trailing their fingers along the invisible air, which rippled like disturbed water. One passed close enough for me to see that its skin beneath the robe was transparent, like a membrane stretched over emptiness. The shape of a person who had long since dissolved from within. Another stopped. It turned, slowly, the stitches at its mouth twitching with every beat of the hymn. It held something. A book, small, leather-bound, and horribly familiar. The 13th homily. It opened the book and pressed it into my hands. I didn't want to take it, but I couldn't resist. My fingers closed around it. The pages writhed. I looked down and saw that I had begun to mouthing the song. Not with intention, with instinct. The words, backward and broken, flowed from my lips in time with the choir. My throat burned. My chest tightened. I tried to stop, but my voice kept going. The robed figures began to vanish, not walk away, not fade, but unravel, as if their forms were threads being pulled back into the dark. One by one, they vanished into spirals of parchment, wind, and sound. I was left alone, still singing, still holding the book. And then I awoke. I was standing, not in bed, not at the desk, in front of the fireplace. My mouth was still moving, whispering. No voice, just breath and shape. The final syllables of a song that did not belong in waking hours. The book was still in my hands, but it wasn't the same. Its cover had changed. The leather was now dark, almost wet, and the title had appeared in etched gold across the front. The choir remembers. My name was inside, not handwritten, printed, a part of the text. And on the last page, where a table of contents should be, there was a short inscription. The sermon continues in flesh. You are the next verse. Chapter 10, the second bell. I held the book until morning. I couldn't let go of it. It wasn't fear, not exactly, it was ownership, or something colder, the sense that the book didn't simply contain me. It had rewritten me. When I tried to place it down, my hand refused to open. The skin of my palm stuck faintly to the cover, like wax to warm flesh. And though I couldn't read the pages anymore, the ink had begun to swim and blur before my eyes. I could still feel the words beneath my skin. They were humming, not with voice, but with expectation. The bell key was on the table, where I had left it, where it had been waiting. I stared at it for hours. Every rule I had read, every warning whispered, chiseled, or etched, they all said the same thing. Ring once at dusk. Never twice. But rules have always been invitations in disguise. I told myself I wanted answers, that I wanted proof, that I needed to know what lay beneath the hill. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. I wanted to hear it again. At sunset, I stepped outside. The hill loomed like a dark heart beneath the sky, pulsing in silence. The grass on its slopes had turned almost black, as if feeding on shadow. The iron cross at its peak reflected no light. The air was wrong. It held me. Not wind, weight. A pressure across the shoulders and chest. The silence of the earth just before something breaks through. And I walked. The bell tower was no tower at all, just a low, skeletal frame of rusted metal that jutted from the ground like a spine. But the key fit its lock perfectly, slipping into a panel that had once been hidden behind a veil of ivy and rot. The mechanism inside turned like breath drawn in after a long silence. I waited, and then I rang the bell. Once. The sound echoed into the soil, familiar, deadened. The same hollow toll I had heard nights before. But I didn't stop. I turned the key again, and rang it twice. For a moment, there was nothing. No wind. No movement. And then, the ground shifted. Not a tremor. Not a quake. But a swell. Like the hill beneath my feet was inhaling. I staggered back as a deep groan rose from beneath the earth, ancient and wet, the sound of stone grinding against stone, of roots tearing free from soil they had never been meant to leave. From the corners of the field around me, I saw the grave markers, the nameless stones that circled the hill, begin to tilt. One by one, they leaned inward. Not randomly. Deliberately. As if bowing, the stone angels at the summit turned. I saw it with my own eyes. Their necks moved, slowly, horribly, as if the stone had softened. They faced inward now, toward the cross, toward the hill's center, toward the place where something buried had heard its name. I ran, back through the brush, through the half-rotted path, through the trees that leaned like spectators. The cottage door barely closed behind me before I collapsed against it, breath ragged, lungs full of the taste of copper. But I could still hear it. The bell, no longer ringing, now echoing, not in the air, in the walls, in the wood, in me. The black glass lantern had lit itself. Its flame was taller than before, thin, blue, flickering like a tongue. The wick hissed with rhythm. It matched the heartbeat in my ears. Then, from beneath the floorboards, a sound I had not heard before. Knocking. 3 times. Not a person. Not even a fist. The sound of stone hands. And with it came the first words I had ever heard it speak, not aloud, but in the air, in the dust, in the bones of the house itself. You have remembered the bell. Now remember the door. I looked down. The hatch at the center of the room was no longer flush with the floor. It had begun to open. The story may end here. But the darkness never sleeps. Like this video to keep the shadows stirring. Share your whispers in the comments. Your voice shapes the next nightmare. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Gothic Hour Stories and Mysteries, where every tale lingers and every soul leaves a mark. The Gothic Hour awaits.